to the Leo Training Podcast with Joe DeLeo. You'll hear in-depth interviews and tips from world-class athletes, coaches, and industry-leading experts to help you train smarter and improve at what you love to do. Train smarter, get stronger, move better, race faster. Here's your host, Joe DeLeo.
We're back with episode 92 of the Leo Training Podcast. My guest this week is Dr. Greg Rose. In June, I attended Dr. Rose's lecture on evaluating Rotary athletes at the Perform Better Summit in Providence, Rhode Island. I was completely blown away by his presentation, and in this interview, Dr. Rose and I build off of this lecture. He also shares the backstory of how he transitioned from a degree in civil engineering to becoming a Doctor of Chiropractic, as well as the birth of the SFMA and the Titleist Performance Institute. Let me share a little bit more about Dr. Rose. Dr. Greg Rose is a board-certified Doctor of Chiropractic and holds an engineering degree from the University of Maryland. Greg specializes in assessing and treating golfers, three-dimensional biomechanics, strength and conditioning, manual therapy, rehabilitation, nutritional supplementation, and therapeutic exercises. Combining an engineering background with an expertise on the human body, Greg helped pioneer the field of analyzing three-dimensional motion capture models of the golf swing. That research has helped golf professionals all over the world gain a better understanding of how the body works during the golf swing. Through the past 17 years, Greg has helped thousands of golfers of all skill levels reach peak athletic performance. His cutting-edge yet research-based form of functional training combined with golf-specific motor learning drills have made Greg one of golf's top strength and conditioning professionals. Greg also helped develop the Selective Functional Movement Assessment, a revolutionary movement assessment that helps identify altered motor control and guides medical practitioners on how to treat patients more efficiently. One final note before we roll to the episode is that during the rapid fire questions, the internet connection deteriorated, so the sound quality during that portion of the interview is not the best. So just a quick heads up about that. Without further ado, let's roll to episode 92 with Dr. Greg Rose, evaluating Rotary athletes. I am thrilled to have on to the Leo Training Podcast, Dr. Greg Rose. Dr. Rose, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy teaching and travel schedule to come on to the show and extend your experience and wisdom with the strength and conditioning and endurance communities.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me, Leo.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you. And I got to make sure I give you a proper thank you because I had the opportunity to attend your lecture at the Perform Better Summit in Providence, Rhode Island earlier this summer. And got a chance to steal a couple minutes of your time afterwards. And you gave me some great advice that you talked about during the lecture for two rowers that I was working with, right. One of whom was rehabbing from a broken rib the year before. So really helped during the evaluation process of the quadruped lumbar lock T-spine rotation and sit and reach tests. Kind of mimicking what they would be doing on the erg or in the rowing stroke. So thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. Glad it helped.
Yeah, absolutely. It did, big time. So without that, I want to turn the mic over to you. And why don't you tell the audience who is Dr. Rose and a little bit about your education and your background?
Okay. Well, I've kind of got a very mixed bag of education. I always say you never know what you're going to be when you grow up. But basically, I started as a engineering student at the University of Maryland. I actually graduated engineering from the University of Maryland. I was what's called a civil engineering, which was basically I used to build houses and roadways and bridges, and that was kind of structural was kind of my deal. And I kind of think that led to engineering is really a way of thinking. You know, it really helps you process and make steps. And if you're familiar with some of the stuff that we'll talk about later in the SFMA flow charts and things, those are very much engineering-based analysis or way of approaching human body and movement. So started with engineering, realized real quick in the process that the last thing in the world I wanted to do for the rest of my life was be an engineer. I actually, it's kind of funny story is I got put on a construction job on a golf course. It was building a house on a golf course. And I never played golf before. And the superintendent was like, "Hey, have you ever played golf?" And I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Oh, you really should learn that because it's going to be important for business. You can take people out there." And the University of Maryland had a beautiful golf course. They actually host a web.com event. And I went out there and I played. And I always say, one of two things happens when you play golf. Either you hate the sport or you get addicted. And I definitely became addicted. And I actually ended up getting a job at the golf course. I worked there all through college and fell in love with golf. And on the golf course one day, I met 3 chiropractors and was talking to them. And they literally convinced me to go into chiropractic. And I literally added a 5th year at Maryland in pre-med, graduated engineering, went off to chiropractic school, and just fell in love with it. I was like, this is what I was meant to be doing, is working in health and medicine. And when I graduated chiropractic school, I always believe that you should combine what you love with your job, right? And I always say, if you're going to be successful in work, you have to outwork everybody else. And if you're going to outwork everybody else, it can't be work. It's got to be your passion, right? Mm-hmm. So I was like, I love chiropractic. I love golf. And in 1995, early 96, I opened up a practice in Washington, D.C. called Advantage Golf. Everybody told me I was crazy to have a golf practice. It's hard enough to survive as being a regular chiropractor. If you're just going to work on golfers, how would this work? And I was like, well, that's what the eye doctor said when he was just going to open up a clinic just for the eyes. And now why would you go anywhere else? And it exploded. And basically, I became one of the world experts in golf and health and fitness. And along the way, in 1996, I met these 3 guys, Kyle Kiesel, Gray Cook, and Lee Burton. Back then they were in Virginia. I was in Maryland. They were trying to come up with something called a functional movement screen at the time. And Reebok University picked that up with them. And we kind of were in the same circles for a while. And then lo and behold, in 2000, maybe even actually 2000, late 2000, early 2001, I met the CEO of Titleist. He brought his 9-year-old son, Peter Uline, into our gym. And Peter is now obviously a tour player, but he basically came in and saw what we were doing and was like, hey, I think this is the future of golf, and Titleist wants to support this and be behind this. And I was introduced to him by a golf professional by the name of Dave Phillips, and Dave, myself, and Walter Uline, the CEO, kind of sat down and discussed what we could do. And, from my perspective, at that point in time, everybody knows the Yankees have a training staff, the Lakers have a training staff, most sports have a training staff. Well, no golf company ever had a training staff. So Titleist was like, hey, we're interested, and Dave Phillips and myself moved out to California, built what was really the first performance center for golf called the Titleist Performance Institute. And at that facility, it's a 30-acre facility. It's the research and development, premier center in the world. And it was just an incredible place to just get incredible data on the best players in the world. And one of the first things we did was we created, and it's another piece of business advice to anybody listening, is I always say, if you're going to be successful, surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. So the first thing we did is we created an advisory board. And I created a medical advisory board. And on that board, I took those guys that I had been pounding around with, like Gray Cook and Mike Voigt, and some of these people that I really respected, and we brought them in on part of our Titleist advisory board. And we really said, hey, we want to research and develop and do things that are going to make a big difference for golf. And really, we had almost 8,000 players playing worldwide. So Titleist is one of the biggest teams in the world, if you think about it. And I was like, I really want to understand what's causing the injury. And between Gray Cook, myself, and Mike Voigt and Kyle Kiesel, we kind of started to really give birth to the SFMA. So back early on, I told you Gray Cook and Lee Burton and Kyle, they were all developing this thing called the functional movement screen when I first started, which was literally, think of this as at the time, a lot of us were chiropractors, physical therapists. We would treat people. Like, let's say you injured your shoulder. We would work on you, and then we'd say, oh, it's good, and you'd go to the gym, and a lot of people would end up back in our office because they hurt themselves in the gym. And we're like, what the hell? We thought you were going there to get healthier. So Gray and Lee and those guys, Kyle, were like, we should come up with a screen that tells people what they shouldn't do in the gym. Like, hey, you're cleared to do these things, but you shouldn't do these things. It was really a protective mechanism to say these are movements that you're safe to do. Well, since all of us have been using that for a while, when I got to Titleist and I brought the board in, I was like, we know the movement screen's a great thing to do unless you're already in pain. you're already in pain, I don't know what's causing the pain. So that's what led to us trying to develop this Selective Functional Movement Assessment, the SFMA. And that's something that we really developed underneath the TPI, the Titleist Performance Institute brand, the Titleist brand. We kind of launched that to the world in 2007, doing workshops on that. And then we were like, listen, this is so much more important than just golf. We put it back under the FMS brand. And that's where kind of I merged SFMA. I kind of joined that team as well. So now I'm one of the, the owners of FMS. We kind of combined FMS and SFMA. And that is literally, I think, revolutionized the way that we evaluate, athletes who have been injured. And just to finish the story on TPI, so TPI, we built this golf performance center, and we're working with players, and we realized real quickly there was no way we could service 8,000 players. So we were like, we need to build teams around every one of our players. So we developed a certification program, the TPI certification, and now we've been teaching people how to become golf or Titleist certified, for over almost 12 years now, and we have over 20,000 TPI certified professionals in 63 countries. I'm off to Beijing, China tomorrow to go to some of our seminars there. And we've got this incredible, I'd say, certification business of educating professionals on how to be golfers and or how to work with golfers, and also from the FMS, SFMA, just working with movement and medicine. So that's a little bit of my background and a little bit about the background of our companies and our businesses.
No, that's phenomenal. I really appreciate you sharing the backstory. As I was kind of doing research and coming up with topics for our discussion today, just looking at your educational background, I had suspected that the engineering education at U of Maryland kind of has really sort of been foundational in how that you look at movement. And
it totally is. A lot of people are like, "Hey, did you waste 4 years going through engineering?" I'm like, absolutely not. I mean, everything. When you're in medicine or movement, it literally is. It's a system of evaluating and checking off things that matter, things that don't matter, and that's engineering. It's like a pilot going through a checklist, or it's very much just a way of thinking. And it used to drive me crazy in engineering school. We'd go through and we learned, like, they teach you how to build a house and put a roof on there and make sure that it was okay if that the roof would handle the load of rain. And then you get into the exam and they'd say, okay, what if it snows 12 feet? And you're like, well, we never talked about snowing 12 feet. They know you're going to get it wrong. They just want to know how you would think through it, right? So it was almost, you have to write down your process, even though they know the answer is going to be wrong. Just write down your process. And when I got to chiropractic school, I was like, oh, this is so easy. It's like all you had to do is memorize. I'm like, where's the trick? And it really wasn't a trick, but I think I always go into it thinking there's a trick because of engineering, if that makes sense, and make sure that there's nothing that can break the chain of events or fool us down the chain. Yeah,
I love that. I think that's just such a great way of thinking, and that really came across during the lecture at Perform Better. Just that was something that really resonated with me, how you look at things and how you think about things sort of in the present moment, and then kind of where it needs to go out, 5-10 steps ahead of time. So that was very clear to me. So one of the other things that you've done and been a part of is this 3D motion capture modeling system. And I've watched some of the videos on MyTPI and have seen you in the video speak about it. So one, what is that system? And what does it do? And kind of, I guess, how does it help from a golf training and movement perspective?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, big topic, 3D motion capture, and really it's the field of biomechanics. Again, in engineering, we do a lot of biomechanics and really trying to understand how segments move in space. So basically, in biomechanics, usually what we use now is we use some type of sensors or video to actually triangulate different parts of the body and track those bodies in 3D space. And by doing that, we can actually create computer models of the athlete or the player or just the patient and really start to understand how they move and why they do certain things. And in motion capture, there are multiple ways that you can collect data, right? There are different types of sensors, different types of systems. One of the cool things about Titleist is I always say golf and Formula One are probably the two sports that have spent the most money on R&D, and it's because manufacturers are involved. For Mercedes, the Formula One's involved and Titleist involved. And it's allowed us to have some of the best toys in the world. So we have almost every motion capture system that really has been in existence there. We have ones that are called optical systems that use retroreflective markers that, like, you might see EA Sports or Spider-Man going across a movie screen. We use some called electromagnetic, where we send a magnetic field around and these sensors track players. We use something called inertial sensors, which are in your phone now, your cell phone, that can track accelerometers, gyroscopes. But all that does is it allows us to, like I said, is understand what makes players tick or what makes a person move a certain way they move. And I think what's really important is we used to believe that, like, if I were to look at, let's say, a baseball batter or look at a golfer, we used to think that I could take you and I could put a tour player or a professional next to you and I could compare you visually and say, look what they're doing, look what you're doing. You know, it's always like golf professionals, they're so used to, they take a golfer, they film them, then they take, let's say, Jordan Spieth or Adam Scott, one of the best players in the world. They film them. They put them on a screen. They split the screen, and they take Adam to the top of the backswing, and then they take their player to the top of the backswing. And they go, look at Adam. Look how good he is. And they like, look at you. You suck. You know, that's basically the typical evaluation. But what they're doing is they're looking at style. They're looking at how they take the club back and where it is. And style can be important. But as we know in most professional sports, man, there are so many styles that make it to Major League Baseball. There are so many styles of quarterbacks in the NFL. There's so many styles of golf professionals. So who's to say one style is better than the other? You know, in golf, we have a player named Jim Furyk, who's always been voted one of the ugliest golf swings. And then you've got someone like Jordan Spieth, who's very smooth golf swing. Or Phil Mickelson, you found a better example. Very, very nice-looking golf swing. But if you were to look at statistics of who's more accurate with a driver, Jim Furyk or Phil Mickelson, the guy with the ugly golf swing actually statistically has a more accurate driver, right? So who's to say that everybody should swing like Phil, or maybe they should swing like Jim, but nobody teaches like Jim because they're so interested in style. And what we knew is that we never wanted to look at style. We wanted to look at efficiency. And that's the big difference that comes up with motion captures. Style is what it looks like on a video camera. Efficiency is, do you get the job done? I don't care what it looks like. Do you get the job done? And the great analogy is like cracking a whip. If I took a whip or a towel and let's say everybody rolls a towel around, and they snap their friend with a towel, right? So I could snap you with a towel with my feet on the ground, and I could create a snap. I can put my left foot up on a table, and I can still snap the towel. It's a different style, but I can still snap the towel. Or I can put my feet on the ground, and I can just try and snap the towel, but I use my hand in a way where the towel doesn't snap. In other words, there's styles that look very different, but they still crack the whip, and there are styles that don't crack the whip. We wanted to know is what you're doing cracking the whip, or is it not? Are you generating power, transferring power efficiently? And that's what motion capture has done for us. And that's one of the things that we have pioneered is that I don't care what it looks like. I care if it's efficient and does it work and it's reproducible. And we can do this with sports motion, from ice hockey to baseball batting to tennis serving to golf. It doesn't matter. You name the sport. We can measure if it's efficient or not. And more importantly is we can even do this in movement. You know, like, hey, are you squatting efficiently? Are you lunging efficiently? And those things have helped drive our recommendations, our screening applications, and things that we do. Is that, all humans are unique. All humans have different physical abilities. But there is one efficient way for you to squat, and it's based on what you can physically do. So if I look and see what you can physically do, I should be able to create a method for you to squat that's efficient, that doesn't create injury or harm. Or if it's, hey, you've got a right hip problem, I should be able to create a golf swing that allows you to still load in the backswing, but it doesn't create an efficiency problem with that right hip. And that's where people think motion capture is cool because it creates all these cool graphics. You look at these graphics; those are cool. That's not what we use them for. We use them to try and figure out the unique signature that each person should be doing for their body and their movement. If that makes sense.
Absolutely, it makes a ton of sense to me, and I think it's extremely powerful because you're able to really dial it in and individualize it to that person's, their structure, if they have any limitations, or their medical history, and figure out, okay, what is the most efficient way that you should be moving or swinging during the golf swing and generating power.
Correct.
And all those other things, all those other variables are going to be major factors. I
mean, this is the problem with a lot of coaches that have a style. Like if you have a style of coaching, you're like, I want everybody to do this, A, B, and C. well, you're assuming everybody can physically do A, B, and C, right? And that's why sometimes these coaches are successful with some players, but they fail with other ones because the other ones, they can't physically do what they're asking them to do, but they don't know how to adapt and create a different style. And that's the thing about great coaches. I think great coaches, they figure out what they're dealing with. They figure out, is this a 5-cylinder or a 6-cylinder or a 4-cylinder car? And they'll figure out the best way to drive that car. They don't try and drive every car like a 6-cylinder. If they're like, that doesn't even exist, there's only 4-cylinder. You've got to look at the engine in front of you and then figure out the best way to perform efficiently. And that's really why, if you've never had any motion capture done, it's really, really, really cool and really different. And it takes the guessing out of this. Yes,
absolutely. Absolutely. So has the data and the research on the motion capture side, has that over the years, has that been able to kind of help refine like the TPI screen and those things?
Big time. We're always looking at, like, we look at efficiency and we see like a player, it almost drives the screening because we look to see like, hey, here's a very common problem with efficiency. Like a lot of people have a hard time transferring energy from their lower body to their torso. And we can see that in efficiency. It's like, hey, the handle of the whip's doing great, and all of a sudden there's this break in energy, and then all of a sudden the tip goes, and we're like, hey, what happened in the middle? And we look at those people, and we'll put them in a bucket, and we'll be like, hey, here's 100 people, and 30 of them had this same problem. So then we go through and we physically screen them, and we look at everything on them. And all of a sudden we're like, hey, of those 30 people that had this problem from the lower body to the upper body, 78% of them couldn't do this. And now we start looking for these physical or these body swing connections, these correlations. And that's what basically creates our screening, is we go through and we like, hey, we now, the beautiful thing about us at TPI and our sport-specific screening is I can take anybody into a room, never watch them swing a golf club. We even have an app that does this. I can screen you, and based on your physical screens, I can predict your golf swing. And our accuracy is incredible on our predicting their yeah. All of that cool. From motion capture.
Yeah. And the other part I love about it is that you're using this data to help drive what you're doing with the screen, and then which is going to help drive the training.
Absolutely. 100%. Right? Because once I make a body swing connection, if I take you in a room and I do a screen, I go, hey, so, let's say one of your rowers, right? We go in there and we say, hey, so how long have you been doing this? And they're like, how the hell did you know I've been doing that when I've been rowing? Because you never watched me row. As soon as I do that, it does a couple things. First of all, the athlete goes, oh my God, this person definitely knows what they're doing, right? Because they didn't even watch me row, and they just predicted what my rowing patterns will look like. And then number two is they go, maybe I'm not an idiot. I've been having these problems. My coach has been telling me maybe there's something wrong with my body that's causing this. So now they're interested, and they're like, what did you find? And can I fix this by doing something in the gym? And it gives people two huge things, which I think are so important when it comes to exercise. You're like, how do I get them to commit in the gym? Well, if they create that connection between their body and their sport or their pain, all of a sudden it gives them hope, because they're like, oh my God, there is something I can do. You just found something. And then, it gives them that excuse, which I think is really, really important. They're like, I'm not an idiot. There's something wrong with my body. And now when you self-internalize and say, okay, excuses, my right hip is my problem. And now if I can fix my right hip, this might be able to go away. It's incredible how that motivates people.
Yeah, and you're building the trust with that athlete.
100%.
That's cool. 100%. That's so cool. So kind of shifting gears there, back to this all connects to the lecture that you did at Perform Better, which was fantastic. So kind of setting the stage here. So I walked in, and I'm sitting in the back row, and I look to my right, and I got Charlie Weingroff to my right, and then 2 rows up is Mike Boyle. And those guys are scribbling notes probably just as furiously as I am. And the presentation was titled Evaluating Rotary Athletes. And I was blown away by this presentation. There was a ton of great material in there. But there was some really key salient points that I wrote down that I would love for us to touch on, because I think they are huge takeaways that everybody should know about. So one of the things that you discussed was kind of evaluating Rotary athletes. And so one is we should start with who are rotational athletes, and then we can get into kind of the 4 must-haves that you covered.
So yeah, I would start by saying your first question is really easy. Try and name me somebody who's not a Rotary athlete, right? So it's kind of hard to pick a sport. Like people are like, well, running isn't rotary. They're just running straight ahead. But, running is. If one leg goes in front, the pelvis is rotating, the shoulders are going the opposite direction, there's this disassociation. That's a rotary athlete. Swimmers, well, of course, there's a complete torque in the body as they go through. The obvious rotary athletes, golfers, baseball players, hockey players, lacrosse players, tennis players, everybody knows those are rotary athletes. But I struggle, I think, to name a sport that doesn't have a rotary component to it. So most sports have some type of disassociation rotation to be able to generate power and transfer power through their body. And that's really the core of the talk was what's similar to be able to create that rotary power that is used from snowboarding to, maybe trying to think. I mean, even like you think of like an equestrian athlete where the horse is doing stuff, but there's a rotary stability going on even to hold on to a horse. It's really hard for me to name a sport that doesn't have a rotary stability component. And then I talked about in that lecture the 4 must-haves. And, we screen everything. Like we look at everything. But if I was going to take the pieces out that I think are the key for rotary athletes, there's a bunch of them. But the 4 that, like, if you mess these up, you're gonna lose some power somewhere, and some of them are obvious, some of them are not. But the first thing we looked at is what I call pelvic control, right? So pelvic control, to me, that is it's like the pin that holds the whole rotary athlete together, right? And basically, when I say pelvic controls, I'm looking at the orientation of your pelvis. If it's anterior tilted or posterior tilted forward, or arching your back or flattening your back, and can you rotate your pelvis independent of your torso? So we have 2 tests where we go through and we just say, can you arch and flatten your back? Can you just rotate your pelvis? So it's basically your pelvis is rotating front and back. Can you do this in athletic posture? And then we have one where we say, can you rotate your pelvis from right to left, just like you're in a barrel without moving your torso? I want to see everything independent of your torso. And it's amazing, you saw in the lecture, that how many people stand up and they can't do this. I mean, they literally can't arch and flatten they can't rock their pelvis back and forth. They think they are, but their upper back's moving or their knees are just moving. And the same thing when we ask them to rotate the pelvis, either the upper body rotates or it just goes sideways, lateral. And if you don't have the ability to control the pelvis in space just standing here under control, well then, at a high velocity athletic movement like kicking a soccer ball or hitting a hockey slap shot, there's just no way you're going to do this properly. And what we found is that if you're going to rotate and take energy from your lower body to your upper body, 2 important things need to happen. First and foremost, your oblique abdominals is what helps rotate your torso. Okay, that's literally 95% of your rotation coming from your oblique abdominals. So anytime a muscle is that important in a movement, you want to do a couple things. Number one is if you're going to create power out of that muscle, you want to be able to stretch the muscle before you contract the muscle. It's called the stretch shorten cycle. Like if I said jump as high as you can jump, you would squat down first and then you would jump, right? So you stretch the muscles in your legs and then you jump. That creates power. That's the same thing with the oblique abdominals. So how do the oblique abdominals work? We have the pelvis here and the thorax here. The pelvis rotates independent of the upper body. When the pelvis rotates independent of the upper body, you stretch your oblique abdominals. So it's really important that you can disassociate your upper body from your lower body to load the rubber band, right? And it's amazing on how many people can't do that. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to try and jump as high as they can jump, but it's like they're not allowed to bend their knees. That is going to handicap you tremendously in creating rotary power. The second thing, so first thing we look to see is can you load the rubber band? Then the second thing that's really important that people don't understand, and I think this is the most important about pelvic control, is when you contract your abdominals insert from your rib cage to your pelvis and in the front of your body. When you contract your abdominals, and I tell people take your hands behind your head and contract your abdominals. When you contract your abdominals, you will feel this crunching and you will shrink. You'll crunch down because the rib cage grabs onto the pelvis with these abdominals and creates this crunch of your abdominals. Well, when you're rotating your torso, the same thing happens. Your oblique abdominals grab onto your rib cage, they grab onto your pelvis, and they create this sling, this little contraction. And if you do that properly, the pelvis will posterior tilt. It'll rock backwards, so it almost flattens your back. That's a sign that your oblique abdominals are firing really hard, and the pelvis is anchoring that it's like a slingshot. It's pulling back, and the pelvis is anchoring versus it moving with you. So to be able to do this, you have to be able to pull the slingshot back. That's the rotation test we did. Mm-hmm. And then you've got to be able to stabilize this, and that's that pelvic tilt test that we did. And if you can't stabilize or can't disassociate, I'm sorry, you're not going to generate power and transfer power from your lower body to your upper body. That was the first thing, pelvic control. Yep. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
The second thing kind of goes along with that. The second thing was, well, if to have pelvic control, you need hip mobility. right? So we're like, hey, it's amazing how many Rotary athletes don't have hip mobility. So what they do is because they don't have hip range of motion, they can't tilt the pelvis, they can't rotate the pelvis, and they use their lumbar spine and they blow out their lumbar spine, or they use their knees. So we talked about you need to have hip mobility, and you need to also have thoracic spine mobility. If you're gonna be a Rotary athlete and you want to stabilize here and move your upper body, the upper body's got to be able to move as well. So we're always trying to make sure that our Rotary athletes have good hip range of motion and thoracic spine range of motion. And we talked about some of those tests, like you mentioned, the lumbar lock test. Some of the tests to be able to identify thoracic spine limitations versus lower back and hip mobility problems. So Rotary athletes need hip mobility and let's call it thorax mobility, right? Because that could be rib cage, it can be the spine itself, it can be some of the musculature. You need to have those. So those are the first two keys for diagnostics or evaluating Rotary athletes: pelvic control, hip and T-spine range of motion. And then I want to know, do you have the ability to stabilize rotation? And then how much power can you generate? So in other words, before you move, you should be able to stabilize wherever you move, right? So we're always looking at Rotary stability. Can you stabilize rotation? Because if I can't stabilize it, it's hard to generate power around it. And we have a couple cool tests for Rotary stability. We have one in the functional movement screen called our Rotary stability test. But one of my favorite ways to just real quickly check Rotary stability is to do a rolling test. We did a test at Perform Better where we just had athletes lay down on the ground, and they're just going to roll over from their back to their stomach and from their stomach to their back. But we make this a little different where we have you roll over with your right arm. Let's say you're laying on your back, and you roll over to your stomach just using your upper body. We say pretend your lower body is paralyzed, and you should be able to easily roll over onto your stomach just using your upper body with your right arm or your left arm. And conversely, you should be able to feel like your upper body is paralyzed and roll over just your right leg from your back to your stomach. Those rolling patterns from your back to your stomach to your back you learned how to do that when you were 6 months old, right? You should be able to still do that. If you can't, that's a classic sign that there's a Rotary stability problem. And if that's a problem, we back up. We say, okay, I know you want to do all these cool Rotary drills, metabolic drills, but let's just go spend a little time making sure your core stabilizers are firing. Because if I'm going to deliver power, there's a sequence of how I fire muscles. And usually what happens first is I need to stabilize before I start creating power. And if your core stabilizers aren't working, it might take us a day, it might take us a week to do this, but we can usually increase our power outputs up to 20 to 40%. So We're going to back up and do that Rotary stability. So the third piece is Rotary. Sorry, do you have a question?
Yeah, one thing you just mentioned there, and I think this is super critical, is you said it's a sequencing issue, and I think this is kind of often confused or misunderstood, and people think it's like either a strength issue, and it's not. That's so important.
When I say stability, I think a lot of people immediately go, "Oh, I need to lift weights," right? Stability in my opinion, has more to do with motor control than it does strength. So in other words, if you say, "Oh, my glute's weak," or I love the one, "I have weak ankles." Okay, I mean, you stand on your ankles all day long and they're weak? Like, what are you talking about? So I think that your brain has to be able to tell the right muscles to fire in the right sequence and in the right amount of effort for something to work properly. And then obviously it has to be strong enough. But it's amazing on how many people don't even have the proper muscles firing in the right sequence, and then they try and go right into strength training, but they're strength training the wrong muscles anyway. It doesn't do anything. So whenever there's a stability problem, you always have to think, is there a motor control problem first? In other words, is my brain firing the right muscles in the right sequence? And a lot of times when you fix the motor control sequencing, the stability problem goes away and there wasn't a strength problem in the first place. Right? So that's that Rotary stability. And then the last thing we do, if you're going to evaluate a Rotary athlete, you've checked pelvic control, you've checked hip and T-spine range of motion, you've checked Rotary stability. Well, now let's check power. Let's see how powerful they are. So we do a Rotary power test. And our power test, I think, is something that we used to test literally almost 50 different measurements of power. And it was literally just an observation that we made after thousands and thousands of data. And this was unique to the golf world, we thought, and then we started testing tennis and baseball and lacrosse, and very similar. And I'll explain the slight differences. But basically what we do is we take a player's vertical jump. And we can do this with broad jump, but I like vertical jump better. So we take a vertical jump. And let me just make it clear, I do broad jump as well, but for the formula, I'm going to tell you I use vertical jump. So I take a vertical jump, and it's a counter movement jump. So they squat down and jump as high as they can using their arms. And we let them do that as many times as they can until they can't jump any higher. whatever that number is, let's say they jump 21 inches. And this is going to sound crazy and weird, and I kind of said this in the class. We take that number, multiply it times 1.5. So let's make it easy. Let's say they jump 20 inches. We multiply it times 1.5. That's 30, right? And we take the 30 and just erase the inches and call it feet. Okay, so their vertical jump is 20 inches. Multiply 20 inches times 1.5 and call it feet. That'd be 30 feet. We do a baseline shot put. We basically have them sit square stance, hold on to a medicine ball. They're going to rotate and throw the shot put as far as they a medicine ball as far as they can to the right and as far as they can to the left. We take a medicine ball that equals 1 pound per 20 pounds of body weight, or 1 kilogram per 20 kilograms of body weight. Both of them will work the same. We basically take that 1 pound per 20 pounds of body weight. We have them throw as far as they can to the right, as far as they can to the left. They should throw a minimum, if they have good rotary power, 1.5 times their vertical jump converted to feet. So if you can vertical jump 20 inches, you should be able to shot put that medicine ball 30 feet to the right and 30 feet to the left. And I like to see it balanced. We talked a lot about developing power left side and right side, and how important that is for rotary power to have that almost equal. And I don't like to see that difference less than 5%. I mean, I want them to be balanced from right to left. And it's just a really weird formula, but it really works well. So if you take a baseball batter, right, and you're like, hey, I want to see, is he getting enough exit ball velocity when he hits a ball and he's got enough rotary power? I'm going to go check his vertical jump. His vertical jump is 30 inches. I'm going to multiply it times 1.5. That's 45. I now want to see that shot put 45 feet right, 45 feet left. If it's less than that, I think you have a rotary power problem, right? And now we'll work into power. Now, we would also assume that you've already tested pelvic control, hip range of motion, thorax range of motion, and rotary stability. Because if any of those are up, we're going to work on those first. Those are the foundation for power. But we go through that power. And then one last piece on power that I think is really important, and we talk about it so much in our power classes, is I like giving players a rating on their lower body power, their core power, and their upper body power. And I like the vertical jump as the rating for their lower body power. So let's say that player vertical jumps 30 inches. I'll just give his lower body power a power score of 30, right? Then what we do is we take that same medicine ball that we talked about earlier, 1 pound per 20 pounds of body weight. We have them lay on their back with their knees bent, hold the ball over their head like they're doing a soccer overhead throw, but they're laying on their back and they're going to sit up and throw the ball as far as they can. We measure how far the ball goes in the air from when it bounces to their sternum when they're sitting up tall. And we literally measure that distance. Whatever distance they vertical jump, that's how far they should throw in feet. So if they vertical jump 30 inches, they should sit up and throw 30 feet with that medicine ball. Then we have them sit in a chair. Back doesn't have to be pressed against the chair, and we have them do a chest pass. The chest pass should equal the sit up and throw, so which should equal the inches. So basically, they should be able to chest pass 30 feet, sit up and throw 30 feet, and vertical jump 30 inches. I know it sounds weird that the inches in feet, it just works out that way. Now, I have noticed, so I'll just repeat that one more time to make sure everybody has that, is if I take a golfer and I check their vertical jump, and let's say their vertical jump is 18 inches, I'm now going to have them take a medicine ball that's 1 pound per 20 pounds of body weight, have them lay on their back, knees bent, sit up and throw. They should be able to throw at 18 feet, and they should be able to chest pass 18 feet. I take the sit up and throw, that's their core power number. The chest pass, that's their upper body number. The vertical jump is their lower body number. So if your vertical jump is 30 inches, lower body's at 30. Your sit up and throw is 20 feet, your core is at 20. And your chest pass is 10 feet, your upper body's at 10. So your power score would be 30, 20, 10, and I can just see your power's getting less and less as you go up your body. Vice versa, if you have somebody who check their vertical jump, and let's say it's 12 inches, their sit up and throw is 20 feet, and their chest pass is 25, then you'd have somebody who their power just keeps getting higher as they go up, but their lower body's the problem. And really quickly, you can identify where the power problem is. Is it a lower body problem, a core power problem, or an upper body power problem? Now, some sports, and I'll just say this, some sports have more value on vertical jump than they do on upper body. Like, I don't want to say soccer's obviously lower body dominated, but even like in some sports like baseball, batting, they tend to have legs, tend to be a little stronger. So sometimes you'll see a ratio of, it's not 1-to-1. In other words, in golf, it's 1-to-1. If you jump 30 inches, you should chest pass 30 feet. You should sit up and throw 30 feet. For some of our baseball batters, we look at it more of about 80% of your vertical jump. So if your vertical jump's 30 inches, 80% of that should be like 25 should be your chest pass and sit up and throw. I still like to get those as close. The most powerful athletes, those three are identical. But some athletes have more vertical jump than they do chest pass and throw. Like I told you, we had a unique audience with golf that's balanced, but I still try to make them all balanced. And what I love about doing this is I see if they have a rotary power problem, right, using the shot put test that I showed you. And then I go through and I check their power scores to see where's the power problem. Is it their lower body, their core, or their upper body? And it just works like magic. If you notice the upper body is the problem, we start working more upper body power drills. Lower body is the problem, more lower body power drills. And the rotary shot put just gets better.
That's so cool. That's so cool. Very cool. And I'm sure that getting to this point for you to be able to share all of this with us, this was a lot of years of data and research.
Yeah,
it was not.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's the beautiful thing about one thing I do want to say that is so cool. Like you mentioned, Charlie Weingroff and Mike Boyle. We all go to all each other's stuff, and the great thing about a lot of us in this business, we're all open books. We all love sharing. We love learning, and I love the fact that Titleist, when I came in there, a lot of times we go work with teams. Let's say in FMS, we work with most professional teams in the world. A lot of them are like, hey, look, everything's proprietary. We don't want it's to our advantage. We don't want to share. When I came to Titleist was like, listen, we're trying to sell more golf balls. We just want more people playing golf because they'll lose more golf balls, right? So anything you find, make it public knowledge. And I was like, man, that's beautiful. So we've never had to worry about sharing information, which has been such a huge advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's what it's all about, because
if you live in the bubble, you'll die in the bubble.
Yep.
You need it outside of your bubble. Yep.
Yeah. And it's kind of amazing. I've had the opportunity to do a lot of these interviews over the last 2 years and speak to a lot of people. And, most people are not, they're not hesitant to share knowledge because they don't think it's like something that's going to be the difference between like winning or losing. They just look at it as like, well, this is what you should do. I'm, moving the needle in the right direction.
If you think you have something that's like a competitive advantage and you think it's something really unique and you're like, I need to keep it secretive over here, you're making such a massive mistake. You should first of all, you're probably not the only person doing this. And if you're talking about it, you immediately establish yourself as the expert, and everybody will look to you for advice, and it just does nothing but good things.
Absolutely. Okay, so that was awesome. You covered the 4 must-haves. So the other thing that was really, really cool during the lecture that really stood out to me, and this isn't quote-unquote a universal law, but you talked about this, is like you gave some examples of some of the best golfers in the world and the things that they were doing in terms of the sequencing to generate power, right? And they're like, if, regardless of style, if the best athletes or the best golfers in the world are doing this, it's pretty much a law. Like this is what correlates to top power.
We have things that we can prove. We have things that are evidence-based. I don't know if you've had evidence-based guys on your show, and because there's the whole world of evidence-based, and then there's the non-evidence-based. And one of my biggest pet peeves is that people say that I only want to do things that are evidence-based. And the reason that's a pet peeve, I'm in a organization that we do tons of research, so we have tons of evidence-based stuff, but we're also innovators, right? And I feel like you have to make a decision in your life. You either want to be a leader or a follower, right? Now, to be a follower is much easier than being a leader, in my opinion, okay? But here's the difference. If you're going to do evidence-based, I think everybody who's in this world that does research knows it's a minimum of 3 years to publish anything, right? So if I'm going to get in a peer-reviewed, IRB, respected journal, it's going to take me 3 years to take the data that I just talked about and publish it. So if you wait for the evidence 3 years, you're a follower, right? Because there's somebody's been doing this for at least 3 years already, right? Now, it's safe. I get it. It's safe. And by the way, a lot of times people don't even read the research. They read the abstract and the conclusion, which is the subjective opinion of the researcher, which isn't even the objective part. So I would always recommend that you read the objective data and make your own conclusion. I don't even think they should be able to put conclusions. You should have to read the research, because so many people quote evidence-based and they don't even know what they're talking about. So I think if you're going to do evidence-based, you have to follow, right? Now, if you want to be a leader, okay, there's some problems with that, right? So why do people not want to lead? Well, number one, you could be wrong, right? So if you're going to lead, number one, you're going to go try some new stuff, do things no one's ever done before. And as long as you're okay within a year or two going, hey, we tried this, and by the way, don't do that. Like that was a mistake, then you can be a leader. If you're scared to do that, then do evidence-based. I think the best organizations in the world do both. I mean, we are definitely trying to cutting edge, do new stuff every day. And our research guys kind of steer the rudder, like, oh, don't do that, go more to the, blah, blah, blah. But, like I said in the lectures, I'm going to show you things I can prove, and then I'm going to show you things that I think you're out of your freaking mind if you don't do, even though I can't prove them. Right? That was kind of what you were talking about. Is there's certain things that I can't give you the articles, the evidence base, but I can show you gold medals, money earnings, world rankings, that they all do these. Right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And
one of the main ones that we talked about in that lecture was what I called the big break theory, was left-handed versus right-handed. Is that kind of what you were referring to?
Yeah, and the power. And you talked about power versus accuracy and where people fell in the top 10 rankings.
Oh, yeah. Oh, so yeah. So that's a great one too. So a cool statistic that if you're not paying attention, you might not realize, but like, I'll give you a couple stats, like in golf. Okay, so golf's an easy one. What do you think is more important for money list? Like where you end up on the money list? Do an easy one first. Driving distance or putts per round? What do you think?
Probably driving.
You golfer?
No. Driving distance is going to be my guess.
Most golfers would tell you that they've heard drive for show and putt for dough, that putting matters the most. But statistically, what you said is correct. Driving distance ranks way higher where you end up on the money list than putts per round. Because putts per round is a very misleading statistic. It's like I can have literally 18 putts in a round and still shoot like 12 over because I could have hit my drive out of bounds 10 times, right? Where if I look at driving distance on the PGA Tour, I mean, if you look at the world rankings right now, the top 10 in the world, 8 of the top 10 in the world literally are in the top 30 in driving distance. That is not a coincidence, right? That's because it's just such an advantage to have. Look at Dustin Johnson, who's the number one golfer in the world. He's probably one of the longest hitters for the last 10 years on the PGA Tour. And the other interesting thing is if you look at accuracy, driving accuracy, if I go back the last 8-9 years on the PGA Tour and I look at the guys who won the driving accuracy statistic, they have something very much in common. The majority of them, I think 8 of the last 9 or 7 of the last 8, have lost their tour card. So in other words, the most accurate players they're not even tour players anymore, right? And if you think about it, is how many people go out there and they just work on accuracy. And I don't care what sport it is. If it's basketball, if it's hockey, if it's golf, they're working on accuracy, but the data shows that speed pays off way more.
Yep.
I mean, so power and speed is where the money is, right? So whether you're learning how to get faster versus working on technical abilities to dribble in basketball, whether you're learning on how to skate faster than how to maneuver a puck, the speed and power usually is the thing that pays off the most.
Awesome. Yeah, that was a great takeaway. And the other thing that was cool too is you showed video as you were talking about that during the lecture, kind of the sequencing of the athletes who are able to sequence and then hit the ball and drive it very far, and then the ones that weren't able to kind of sequence and kind of the order of operations, so to speak. You know, their upper body was going before their hips and their pelvis.
Right. We kind of talked about that with the kinematic sequence, that efficiency of like, if you're going to crack a whip, you start with the handle and then you transfer down to the tip. You don't start with the tip and then do the handle. Right. That kind of doesn't make sense.
That's right.
Yeah.
So tying all this together, right? So you kind of given us the diagnostic tools, what the best at the highest level are doing in terms of success, and what sort of stacks up statistically in terms of longevity, you know, and who's performing well. So as coaches, right, what do we need to do a better job of when we're training rotational athletes, right? Do we need to do a better job up front of evaluating and working on sequencing and developing the rotary power and not focusing as much on pure strength, like lifting heavier? You know, what do you think?
Well, yeah. So to me, there's no question the biggest mistake that trainers do is they don't assess. You know, if you don't assess, you're just guessing, right? So I'm like, why guess when you can assess? Because I haven't met a Rotary athlete that I train the same yet, right? So every one of them is totally different. So you might have in your mind the players coming in and you're like, hey, I know we're going to work on this. Majority of the time, it's not what we're working on, right? So, you know, like we talked about 4 major things. It can be their ability to control the pelvis. It can be their ability to have mobility and their hips and their T-spine. They have no stability. They could just have a pure power problem. And that power problem can be an upper body problem or lower body problem or core problem. And by the way, if you have a lower body power problem, well, power is the combination of strength and speed. So is that power problem a strength problem or is it a speed problem? Well, I can test your strength. and then I can determine. So all of this is based on assessment, right? So if you're not assessing, you're wasting time. And people are like, oh, but I don't have time to do a good assessment. I'm like, well, you have time to just waste training sessions? I don't understand. Like, let's figure out how your time should be spent so that the training session is so much faster, right? So don't assume, don't guess, assess. That's number one. And then don't be scared to go back to fundamental stuff. Like if rotary stability is off, people are like, oh, that's not fun. They want to do fun drills. I'm like, what's more fun is throwing 20% more power output, right? That's what's fun. So if we go back and we do this little stuff for a week or two, it's not like we're going to do that for the next year. And the power outputs go up and the vertical jump goes up 10 inches. Trust me, it's fun. People like this. And then the other piece that I think is really important when you're training a rotary athlete is give them the objective measurements that you're looking for. If you're working with a baseball player and you want to make sure that they're hitting the ball farther, well, check their exit ball velocity. There's so much technology and tools out there now where we can actually radar guns and sensors where we can see if what you're doing is actually making a difference. And if you can see it, your student can see it, and that motivates them to stay, in the gym, right? It's not a mirror. They're not trying to look better in a gym. Mm-hmm. Most athletes, right? They're trying to perform better. So if you're looking at an athlete, obviously, it's just somebody who's just injured, pain, of course. But if you're just trying to improve performance, give them the objective measurement that you're looking at, and it's either working or it's not. Right? Don't pretend like it's working. It's either working or it's not. If it's not, change what you're doing, or more assessment.
Right. Absolutely. That was great. Is there anything else that you want to touch on before we hit the rapid fire?
Let's go rapid fire.
All right. Awesome. So these are, I ask all the guests that I have on these questions. These are just kind of fun so the audience gets to know you a little bit better. Okay. So Dr. Rose, given all your experience and the knowledge you've accumulated at this point in your career, if you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself 15 years ago?
I told you, I already said this, but definitely surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. A lot of people think, well, I'm just like a trainer in a gym. I can't have an advisory board. Why not? Why can't you have an advisory board? There's so many people out there that would probably love to give you advice. And basically an advisory board just means when you call them, they'll pick up the phone and give you advice. That's right. It. There's a lot of people like to do that. And you have no idea how much apprenticeship and mentorship helps you in your career. It's helped me more than anything. And I feel like if I were to go back in time, I would do more of that. I'd go shadow the people I respect, watch them. And it's amazing on how many of them, like you've said before too, are willing to share. So surround yourself with people who are smarter than you. Very important.
Awesome. If you had to pick one exercise, what's your favorite training exercise to do? Whether it's for strength or power, what's your favorite exercise to do?
Well, since we're talking about rotary power, I'll give you a rotary power one, and that's I like doing a half kneeling medicine ball chop, a bounce pass. So basically, you're half kneeling, whichever knee's down, you take the medicine ball and you bounce it towards the down knee, and you try and bounce over a person's head who's about 45 degrees behind you. Right, that little bounce pass incorporates thoracic mobility, hip mobility, pelvic control, rotary stability, and rotary power all in one exercise. So that's definitely one of my favorite rotary power exercises.
Excellent. How has your training changed today compared to 15 years ago?
Oh, God, I'd be embarrassed for you to see. I mean, I feel like, listen, if you're not learning every year, I tell all of our guys in our seminars, I'm like, next year, this class needs to be different than this year. I don't want to say like, hey, we've been doing this for 15 years. I'm like, that means like you've been using the same computer for 15 years. I mean, it's ridiculous. So I feel like every year you need to evolve. And if you're in an environment where you have other coaches or trainers with you and they have ideas, stop being an idiot and listen, right? Because there's a lot of smart people out there have that growth mentality. I wouldn't even know where to start to answer that question because everything's different.
Awesome.
We didn't even know really about stability 15 years ago.
Right.
That term was not really well used. Yeah.
That's a great point. Excellent point. Have you ever had an injury? And if so, how did that injury affect your training and your life?
Where do you want me to start? Am I showing my fingers and all my broken bones? No, anytime you medicine balls, you're gonna have. So probably the biggest injury that affected me. I broke a bone in my wrist about 4 years ago, and it had nothing to do with training. It was actually gardening. I'm a fanatic gardener. And a shovel, I lost a fight against a rock, and it broke my wrist. And literally, I learned a lot about bone bruises, and because it literally took 18 months for that to heal. So I think what's amazing to me is, or what I learned is, it doesn't matter how small the injury seems. Like someone's like, oh, I just got my thumb right here hurts. Doesn't matter how small it is to you. It's amazing how that little injury can show up everywhere, and take everything serious. Every type of injury is serious, and think about how it affects the entire training regimen as they go through. Because I mean, I think the risk is obvious. That's going to affect a lot of things, but sometimes what's little you think is little is major to them. So whatever they're complaining with, make sure you go through every exercise and make sure it's not affecting.
Absolutely. Yeah, and you just mentioned something there too, the wrist. I've seen some of the recent articles. We seem to be looking more and more at the wrist and the ankle, right?
Well, think about, for an athlete, if your feet are the only thing in touch with the ground, and your hands are the only thing in touch with the implement that you're using. So especially for a striking athlete or somebody with an implement, baseball, hockey, golf, tennis, those are the connections to the two things that matter the most. That's a big deal.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. What is one thing that high school athletes should be doing more of to complement their training and their health?
Can we say diet? Am I allowed to talk about nutrition?
Sure.
I mean, you remember when we were in high school, right? What did we used to eat? I mean, I feel like I don't think people realize how important what food you put in affects everything, not only for how you feel, but how you perform. So I would say, this is an incredible time in a child's life when they're in high school. They're going through their growth spurt and puberty, and testosterone's at highest levels, and we can take advantage of those things unless you screw it up with what you're eating. So I'd say nutrition is really important. And just remember, when you're going through growth spurts, and this might be early in high school or late junior high, that the bones grow faster than the muscles. So this is one of the most important times to work on flexibility. And if you don't, I really don't think you can go back in time. I really think it's hard to become super flexible if you neglect that during this phase. Very important.
Very interesting insight. Thank you. What's your best tip to help improve recovery after a training session?
I just kind of mentioned nutrition, right? So yeah. I feel, if you're, it depends on the training session you're doing, but if you're, sleep, of course, is nothing's more important than sleep. If you're not getting at least 8 hours, you've got problems. But then, if you're doing strength training, at a certain age, once we have the testosterone, we want to do hypertrophy training, where we're actually tearing muscle and trying to rebuild muscle. So strength training's job is to tear the muscle. Your job is to rebuild it bigger and stronger by adding more myofibrils in your muscles. And to do that requires testosterone and the building blocks nutrition-wise. And if you do not have the appropriate building blocks, amino acids, and things ready, then it's not building muscle. It's called trauma, right? So I think that nutrition, and you see people supplementing with different shakes and stuff like that, are so important if you're going to go into a heavy strength training, so that you have that recovery afterwards.
Absolutely. All right, we got 3 more, but these are nothing training related. These are all fun. So, what's your favorite meal?
Favorite meal? Good meal or bad meal?
Oh, good meal, of course. Yeah.
Good meal. Okay, healthy meal. Let's see, what's my favorite? I'm a horrible one to ask, because I've been a vegetarian for almost 15 years, but I recently eat fish, and so I'll tell you, it's going to for me to give up sushi. I love sushi.
All right, sushi.
And I'm a sushi.
Okay. All right.
It's probably not the healthiest thing, because it's not, but
you're breaking up a little bit there at the end.
Hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's all right. Okay, so sushi is your favorite meal.
I love sushi. I'm a big tuna fan, salmon fan, and then it'd be hard for me to give up sushi anymore. Yep.
Okay. 2 more. What's one book that everyone should read?
E-Myth by Gerber. This is for anybody who's in business. The E-Myth stands for the entrepreneur myth, but if you're ever going to open up your own business, it'd take you one night to read this, but it goes over the biggest mistakes all entrepreneurs make. And I feel like that's should be required reading for any trainer.
Okay, E-Myth. All right, and then final question. Who have you studied, or do you continue to study in your career to improve and get better?
I think you probably heard this from a lot of people you've interviewed. I'm a fanatic reader. right? So
Yeah.
there isn't one particular trade. I love knowledge. I love learning. I not only read everything I can find from my profession, but from anything that deals with our profession, from books from the top coaches in different sports, from tennis to golf to baseball to lacrosse to the training to the medical ones. I listen to like TED Talks and all the ones online. I'm trying to think if there's like one person that if I had to follow one person, it would kill me because I like seeing a bunch of them. I'm gonna pass. I can't one person that.
That's okay.
I just think you need to. If you don't like reading, it's called books on tape.
Yeah.
Put it. Have somebody read it to you.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah, that's great, Dr. Rose. That takes us through the conclusion of the show. You're off the hot seat now.
All right. Well, I really appreciate you having me on. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to the Leo Training Podcast. Subscribe and get even more expert training tips at www.leotraining.io.